The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday morning show. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Cranack.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome to it. Weekend editions here. It's Hail Varsity. We're powered by Cornhead Lager. We're a few minutes tardy. That is on me. We are all about accountability. As the computer reboot caused a few swear words. But we're here. Thank you for checking us out on YouTube. Always subscribe and like the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Hail Varsity Radio Twitter is where you can follow and watch. KFOR Facebook, KFOR Twitter, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Mark Cranack is on assignment on the West Coast. So he may drop in. Time difference there. So either he's getting in or we'll catch him next week. But hope everyone's doing all right. Hope you enjoyed a Friday of basketball, and it's been a week of spring football. And I know, Elijah, you're gearing up to put on the umpire uniform a little later today. Should be good weather. I've got basketball on my mind as we'll watch some more tournament. Tim chimes in, hey, y'all, from March Madness to sadness to, oh, well, run the damn ball. Brandon Vogel with us in about 10 minutes. We'll get our shout-outs, our starting five this Saturday morning, and move forward. The Iron Horse, Gary Sharp, with us here in a little less than 45 minutes. So can't complain. It does feel like the weather's shifting. Mama is up and moving around. She is not real pleased I was not there to help her get the pups out and then fed this morning. So if there's anything hurled at me, I can't see or duck. Elijah, be my eyes. Get my six, all right? No. You're here for the carnage.
I'm here for the average viewer, and I believe the average viewer would quite enjoy that. So therefore,
wow.
I'm sorry. There's nothing you're getting from me. Also, by immediately putting that on me now, if it were to happen throughout the show, it would then be my fault, and I don't want it to be my fault. So I'll put my hands up like this. I am. Let's see. What would you say? I'm a neutral participant in this.
You're an innocent bystander.
I mean, yeah. We'll go. I'm Switzerland in World War II. I'm just hands up.
Don't invade.
I'm neutral. I'm neutral.
Well, let's get to some hoops. Creighton's season ended. The big story coming out last night, right around 6 o'clock or so, from KETV, as their investigations obtained exclusive text messages from texts between Nebraska leadership and former athletic director Trev Alberts. So the response to this has been a couple of things. Oh, wow, or who cares, move on. And I can see both sides of it, but we all had theories, right? What really went on and why leave if you're Trev Alberts? And you can't do anything about it right now. I mean, I think you can be ticked off if you're a Nebraska fan. I think you can be somebody that's also, hey, Trev, best of luck. I think you can be critical of that move by Trev, but I think you can also understand it. I mean, I'm trying to walk in all parties' shoes here and then formulate a thought. And then when you look at the new guy, Troy Dannon, we got a chance to meet him this week, and I like him. And, there's work to do. There's alliances to be made, and there's plenty of potholes to navigate as somebody in that chair. But I think Nebraska, from a timeliness standpoint, made a really good hire with a guy who's, swam in those waters before. So all I care about here is Nebraska being functional moving forward. And I think you got to peek to some of the dysfunction, or at least ruffled feathers, with this investigative report as to why a guy might move on.
And I hope this is the story that puts the entire Trev Alberts saga to bed. Like, I hope this is what ends it. It's an interesting peek behind the curtains, some inner workings of what was actually going on that weird Wednesday. I guess there's even some Tuesday night texts as well. All in all, the Regents come off as very pleading in it. We don't get a full exchange of what was actually replied by Trev to the Regents and to Pillen at all times. If he replied at all, we don't really know. A lot of will call, didn't want it to be on record, I'm assuming, from Trev's end. But, like, all in all, very pleading from the Board of Regents is the field. Trev definitely... what's the best way to put it? Pulled a Trev on the way out based on how he's been known to leave other jobs. Kind of left everyone in the dark, that feeling of middle fingers up on the way out the door. That's the feel you get from these texts as well. But it's an interesting peek behind the curtain of what actually went down on that day. But, like, other than that, I think it's finally the story that can put this whole thing to bed. At least that's my hope. I'd like to move on. I'd like to talk football. This is a story. It's an important story to discuss. It's interesting. I just hope it's kind of the last thing, or the last part of this Trev Alberts saga.
Well, you had Governor Pillen and the Board of Regents actively working to retain Trev Alberts just hours before his departure. That from those messages obtained by KETV Newswatch 7, you had Alberts accept the A&M job on March 13th. Pillen and the Regents, the Nebraska governor, pleading with him until that announcement. And here are some of the quotes. On March 12th, the night before the announcement, you have Regent Robert Schaefer said, "Let me know if you want to visit yet tonight. Regardless, please give me a call before finalizing any decision. We're going to make this work." And then you have a screenshot here with Robert Schaefer. Trev's response, presumably in a meeting, will call. "Thanks. I'm back home now and can give you a call shortly as I have more to discuss and share with you. Let me know if you want to visit yet. Regardless, please give me a call before finalizing any decision. We're going to make this work," with a smiley face. "I'll try in the morning. Appreciate you, my friend." You have also Regent Claire messaging Alberts March 12th. "I haven't heard anything from you, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not. What I do know is that we're going to have a great president soon, and I hope you would give him a chance. The other thing I know is that NU was, if NU was a stock, I'd buy it. Exciting times are on the horizon for us, and you're a huge part of that vision. Don't let a couple of situations that have happened either when Ted was leaving or gone already be a driver in the decision. Instead, be a part of something bigger than you. And with your big heart, I don't know if that's supposed to be all. I don't know if that's a mistype or not, but you love in Nebraska and NU, and what that N means, and what your heart feels about Nebraska. You know what the right call is for you and your family. And if your heart needs help convincing your mind, let me know, and I will do all I can to help your heart." So you have that. You've got a screenshot also here, a text to Trev and Angie, another text to Trev and Angie. That's the shot there. And then you have, Pillen also responding. So it's just a mess here, and we don't have specifics on what things ticked Trev off, but you've got two regents and the governor involved here. Elijah saying, "Dude, I know you're ticked off. I know the president thing is probably been wearing on you. That's my read into these text messages, but don't go." I mean, and it looks bad. It looks bad on different fronts, where the pleading looks kind of bad, but I understand it. and the leaving looks bad, but I understand it. And it just kind of paints the picture of dude had had enough and peace out. And everyone's been in that position before, and you hate. And I don't think the Regents wrong. If you're buying stock, I think the stock in Nebraska is going to accelerate and be extremely valuable. It's going to make you money. It's going to be a wonderful investment. Part of the reason the stock's going the right arrow is because of what Trev Alberts did with some of his hires and reconfiguration. Mm-hmm. Now, let's just get down to it, because the other thing that's been pretty real here the last part of this week has been the discussion about the stadium renovation. I think from a timeline standpoint, Trev wanted to get that done sooner rather than later. And I still think whether that would have been approved on his timeline, there's still probably a good chance that Trev Alberts moves on to something else. And that something else may not be an SEC athletic director's job. It may be something to the tune of another conference commissioner gig, or some role in the bigger scope of whatever college football becomes here between the SEC and the Big Ten. He had national aspirations, I believe. And that is still an aspiration, I believe, with Trev and his ability to have one foot in the Big Ten for a few years, 2.5, and then however long he's at A&M. Maybe he stays at A&M. But that's pretty bulletproof on a resume when you're talking about the next czar of college football, or the first czar of college football, to be an AD in both of the conferences. With his background, from a legacy standpoint, you build, right? You put something together at the stadium that you're remembered for, not just the flip on the field part. I mean, he's known for being a part of Volleyball Day. He's known for hiring Matt Rule. He's known for hanging with Fred and Nebraska getting to the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of good he's known for. But he'd had enough BS with the meetings or the closed door stuff that impeded what progress and vision he saw. The appetite is very real from a donor standpoint, or lack of appetite with funding and moving forward with that South End Zone project. We'll get to spring football thoughts as well. We welcome in Brandon Vogel with counterread, counterread.com. Subscribe to what he and Aaron Sorensen do. It's an awesome Substack that gives you great takes and thoughts and insight on all things Nebraska. Vogues, we're just talking about the good old Freedom of Information Act. And I wanted to get your perspective before we dive into some spring football, some thoughts. We know the quarterbacks and running backs and tight ends and defense and all that is pretty juicy for Nebraska football fans this first week of spring. All that being said, the text messages between regents and governors and athletic directors, wow. You got that put on a platter for you yesterday. What'd you think?
Well, 3 cheers for FOIA, first of all. I think required to say that as a sort of journalist. But, we get a little more smoke. I don't know that there's a smoking gun. I don't know that there is a single, thing here that was like, well, this is the issue, and if we can't address it, then I'm out of here from Trev Alberts' perspective. That said, it's clear from this that Nebraska leadership was very invested in him staying, which means he had to be pretty invested in not. So, it's not this, it's not just the stadium thing. Who knows? But I think there's just kind of no other way to read it other than a vote of no confidence in kind of the leadership that Alberts had experienced. Whether that's, right, wrong, just his subjective opinion, and whether there's some objectivity to it, we don't know. But I think yesterday's text messages just kind of added to that, like something was off there from from Trev Alberts' perspective. And here you have regents, even the governor of the state, expressing a willingness to, when you're down to the 11th hour, a willingness to try and address whatever it was. We just don't know quite what it was, if there is an it.
We can speculate on the it and the it or it's, the things that come to my mind: South Stadium and that price tag. Two, the collective. And listen, you have had, and we have heard how grateful Nebraska's football staff and quite frankly, athletic department is for the collective. We know how grateful the student athletes are for the collective, because Nebraska is a force and a player when it comes to student athletes and their involvement, and quite honestly, their ability to be compensated. I mean, Nebraska's not, it's name of the game, and that's something that the new Nebraska athletic director has embraced and gets 1,000%. That's how you play, and that's who you got to be locked in arms with. From a Trev standpoint, I mean, you had a second collective in Omaha that I don't think lasted, and I think you had an icy relationship between the collective and Trev Alberts. That's just my view from, South Lincoln. But all that being said, it comes down to some of the personalities involved, but it also comes down to just the power part. I mean, Trev's a guy that wants control, has always wanted control, and dude, I'm the boss. What I say goes. Well, that may be true up to a point. You've got to involve and, listen and hear out what some needs and wants are from a collective standpoint. Their input is very, very real with their financial investment. And I don't know how well that always played.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough spot for AD, at any school like A&M, Nebraska, of that ilk. For a long time, these ADs were kind of, they run the athletic department. That's their job, and it's a big job. There's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of people involved, and you kind of had control over everything. And that, came with some good and some bad. Like if things were going well, it fell to you, and you'd churn through some jobs if that were the case. But now you almost can't be involved in this big piece of it, this kind of like big new frontier for college athletics. And you got to hope that, you and whatever collective may pop up, because that's what they did. They just kind of popped up all around these college programs. You got to hope there's some pretty good, to use a term that we've heard way too much lately, alignment there. And, who knows what that is anywhere, and the tough thing with NIL, and this is kind of like for myself, a careful what you wish for sort of thing, is like, we don't really know anything about it in terms of like the numbers behind it, like what's actually happening. Are, a dozen athletes, across an athletic department getting 80% of the money, doesn't matter if that's the case. It's very strange. And I'm not sure I want to be in a world where we're like stacking up NIL revenue like we do recruiting rankings. But I also know that a complete lack of transparency industry wide is a tough thing to really know what's going on there. So I think you're right. I think when you look at Dannon's press conference this week, he hit that NIL point very hard, which is smart. But I also think it kind of tells you it might be another breadcrumb on the trail as we look for where did what kind of led to Alberts heading to College Station.
Vogel says we, I guess, kind of put a bow on this entire Trev Alberts saga. Now we get the peek behind the curtains with these texts from KETV. Who's this a worse look for, the Board of Regents or Trev Alberts, now that we know a little bit more? Well, what is this going to be remembered as? maybe 5 years from now? Bad look for Trev, bad look for the Board of Regents. Obviously, I think some of the blame goes around. Could go on both sides, but who's it a worse look for?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It'll probably be determined by what happens at A&M and what happens in Nebraska going forward from here, which, is kind of the cop-out answer, but I think that's the case. It's a really tough one, and I think in Nebraska specifically, with Alberts and his connection to the program, the extension that was signed just at the end of November, how blindsided so many people kind of felt by it. The Board of Regents might be a slight favorite here in terms of having Nebraskans side with them because they're the ones that are still here. But I think ultimately it'd probably be determined by, hey, was this just a hiccup for Nebraska and it continued on, or was it something bigger? And we won't know that for a while.
Folks, let's keep with the breadcrumbs theme. What were some of the breadcrumbs you were able to follow with Matt Rule this week as we turn to spring football? And we heard from Thomas Fedoni, and I was pretty excited to kind of read into him. Not only you get a healthy Thomas Fedoni and a confident Thomas Fedoni, but a guy that seemed really amped up with not only his offensive coordinator, but a new position coach for him, a third, and usage, right? You get a guy that's got that high profile of a recruitment, and now it's go time going into his junior season. Excited for him because I think he's a hell of a good player. You want to see him blow up. What did you take away from Fedoni and just overall some musings from this first week?
Yeah, I think pass catchers was, so tight ends and wide receivers was probably near the top of week one takeaways. There wasn't, with the schedule and the AD introduction, there wasn't a ton this week. But I think that's the big one. And you mentioned it, Fedoni kind of expressing confidence in working more hands-on with Satterfield. Just that piece of it. I think Nebraska is it's too early to say they're a lot better. Nebraska's better at that spot than they were at this point last year. And I don't think things improved drastically for Nebraska as they got into the actual games in the fall there. They were just young, dealt with more than their share of injuries at that spot. So, and that's a big piece of it. When you look at the quarterbacks, Rule said he's looking for three guys that he could start in a game. Well, we know Harburg has, and yeah, you could look at the numbers and the turnovers and be like, well, is he your starter again? Maybe, maybe not. Fact is, Nebraska had a pretty good record in those games that he played anyway. So you can kind of put him to the side and say, well, we know he can start games if you need him to. It kind of focus comes down to the other two. That's going to be a constant drumbeat through each of these availabilities that we get. But, I think there's a lot of unknowns still on offense, but we're only a week in. But I kind of left it thinking, okay, no major catastrophes that we know of. And I do think Nebraska is upgraded on offense overall, which is kind of the biggest question mark for them going into 2024.
Brendan Vogel with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. And Brendan, with the we call it this is the first week of spring practice in the books. We've got the first media availability. Obviously, Harburg was talked about. Quarterbacks are going to be the discussion through spring football. I think there's some other intriguing storylines, but do you think based on how the coaches spoke this week, Trev Alberts, dang it, there's one in the swear jar. Matt Rule, with how Matt Rule spoke this week, along with players Thomas Fedoni, do you think there's been an effort to take some of the pressure off of Ryle and knowing Ryle, probably his job to lose, yet they're still talking about Harburg, they're still talking about Kalen. Do you think there's an effort to take pressure off Ryle? Is that just a case of it is just spring football and we're still a long way from announcing a starter, so we're not going to go there? What do you think the side of it is? Because it's clearly not being spoken to from a press point of view as if Dylan Ryle is going to be the starter, despite what we all can assume that he's the most talented guy in the room. Yeah,
I think that is a purposeful effort. And it's been the case, really since late December, since first signing day, I think. And it's also, part of this too is, I think, to be fair to Daniel Kaelin. But anytime Raiola comes up, it's not very far behind that Daniel gets mentioned as well. So I think that's all, kind of the smart way to do it. We know what Dylan Raiola's recruiting rankings were. We know what family he comes from, and you're just never going to get around that stuff. That said, all you can do when you're a coach or a player up there is try to be as broad based as possible. So, is it to relieve the pressure? I think it's just more kind of fairness and creating, or not creating, maybe reinforcing the kind of locker room that you want to have, because it's tough. Nebraska doesn't sign players like this very, very often. So it hasn't had to deal with this sort of thing the whole time, but we see it happen in other places all the time. I mean, Arch Manning at Texas, I'm sure it was much the same during his first spring. And they managed that the way they managed that.
The thing that I'm excited about is not only the talent accumulation, if you're a Nebraska football fan, but just the amount of work and sincerity that goes into communication, but also the development of the relationship. Matt Rule's going to shoot straight with his 5-star quarterback and his 4-star quarterback and his incumbent quarterback that, all right, dude, you run the option better than you throw it, so let's run the option more. All of that is out front. You're not always having to dig for answers or the truth. There's so many programs that for years could just BS a kid along the way to keep him, developing, but just to keep him on the roster. I mean, I marvel back to all the former Texas A&M quarterbacks that transferred to Oklahoma or elsewhere that all went in the first round. Some of them went first overall, and just Kevin Sumlin and what he was able to recruit but not keep. And that's why this, retention part and recruitment part that Dannon touched on is so big. It's always going to be an issue in the portal era with the quarterback room, and it's a big time problem for schools. Now, your answer is also the portal to go get your 1-year Band-Aid guy. But I think Nebraska's got a shot. This may be way early to say this, and we'll burn this tape, but I think Nebraska's got a shot to keep dudes in that quarterback room because A, they'll like what they'll get from Glenn Thomas, but B, I think they'll buy into the fact, okay, I didn't win the job this year, whoever that may be, I can keep chopping wood and I'll get another shot. Maybe not next year because whoever beat me out might be a multiple year starter, but I like it here so much. I'm going to just keep working. And when my time comes again, I'll still be here. I think Nebraska's got an opportunity, not always, but I think it's better than most places. That's my early read on just what they've got down there.
Yeah, I mean, I think honesty in college football from the coach down is rarer than it should be, and all signs are like we're not there for those conversations, of course, but I've never had a reason to doubt that when Matt Rule says like, yeah, we'll tell the guys like, here's exactly where you're at. If you do this, this, and this, you could be here. Or, for some guys, it might just be like, man, it's going to be tough. And I think any student athlete would appreciate that. Dannon's point, like, it's been a while since I think any of us would probably say Nebraska has been one of the best development football programs in the country. For a long time it was, past decade plus, we kind of looked across the division and be like, oh, Wisconsin, now that's a development program right now, and Iowa. And today with the transfer portal, I think it's become harder to be that kind of program. So it's probably even a bigger challenge to get back to that for Nebraska than it was 10 years ago. That said, I think the rewards are probably greater if you can pull it off. And I do think this is an area where, Nebraska being a little bit isolated, being the only show in town, it's always recruited nationally, which makes retention even a little bit harder. But the world has changed a lot, over the past 20 plus years, to the point where it's, players just have access to so much more. And it doesn't seem like, and the city of Lincoln, just the growth that we've seen there. So it could be a little, I think best case scenario, and they've got a long way to get there. Yeah, maybe you can become a little bit of a development retention oasis in a college football landscape where that's not what it is at a lot of places.
Well, NIL doesn't hurt either.
Brendan,
stick.
Obviously, with the next 5 years of college football, so much change being expected, we don't really know for sure. But what do you think a healthy number for retention will be? A school that is leading the country, or one of the better schools in terms of development and retention, what do you think that retention looks like for Nebraska if that is the case?
Good question. It's still so early, relatively speaking, in the transfer portal era that I don't know if it's flattened out yet. Like, I don't know if we're still on an upward climb or if we're on a downward slope in terms of the numbers that you can expect year over year. Pre-portal, Nebraska would keep basically 60% of its scholarship recruits. Like, if you could stay at that in a transfer portal era, I think you'd be doing very, very well. Which seems kind of crazy to think, like, when you consider all the time put into recruiting. And if we're at a point where nationally you're just like, yeah, like, add up all the hours and air miles and money, et cetera, to get these 25 kids in, and you're going to keep 12 and a half of them on average. It's wild to think, which, we'll see how much longer that stays sustainable, in terms of change in the next 5 years. I think the biggest one is still with player compensation. They have their NIL rights now, as we were talking about a little bit earlier. None of us actually know all that much what that looks like. A lot of numbers get kicked around, and there's kind of no way to verify them. There's various efforts out there, whether it's unionizing or considering a basic income for athletes in some of these sports. I think that's kind of the biggest wild card that's out there. Because if you go to that spot, things get pretty interesting pretty quickly. And Nebraska financially, seems like it would still be in a good spot to be one of the schools that could easily pull that off. And that not all of them could.
Brandon Vogel, a couple more minutes. counterread.com. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Mark Cranack on assignment in the West Coast. The puppy Sterling wants to come in as he is barking at me. Vogues, he's going to come visit you. That's what I'm going to say. That's how I'm going to put it. And he'll go to Camp Vogues.
Is that what you tell the kids? Like, oh, yeah, we sent him off to the farm.
Sterling's going to get a little Junction Boys treatment from Vogues, I think, and rough it. He try to concentrate as he shrieks. So defense. Let's talk Nebraska's defense, and that is one side of the football that you were really just excited about for Nebraska last year. You get your dudes back. You've got a year of development, and you also have some guys that are out that Rule kind of alluded to. That said, he feels good at some of the guys getting time. We talked earlier in the week a little bit about what the ceiling of Nebraska football could be. Let's get specific on just an area you think Nebraska could be game-changing in. Do you think they're going to be even better against the run as we project a little bit? Do you think they're going to be super dynamic getting after the quarterback, or do you think door number 3, this is the year it flips, and it's a little bit of a 2003 tribute when we talk about takeaways on that side of the football? Because all those things are circled for sure by Tony White with some of those steps as he drills down how to get better.
Well, I mean, the quickest way to get to 10 wins in 2024 is probably to force 40 takeaways or whatever it was Nebraska had in that.
Find a Bullocks to roam in the secondary.
2003 season. Then you'd come close. You wouldn't quite get there. Maybe you'd even the scales a little bit for the last 15 years of Nebraska turnover behavior, offense and defense wise. I think Nebraska has a chance to be both better against the run and getting after the passer, because the thing that jumps out to me, I think they have a chance to be a big pain in the butt on the defensive line for a lot of teams. Like when you look at just the size and strength of Hutmacher and Robinson, and those two guys playing together, and then kind of the next wave behind them, and also the guys on the edge, Lenhart, Prince Will, like they have a chance to be really dynamic up there. And we've seen at Nebraska, but also really anywhere. Like if you just win on the defensive line, Texas is a good example last year. Like Texas, was supposed to be pretty good going into 2023. Well, those 2D tackles were like even better than advertised, and they were advertised pretty heavily. And all of a sudden, they're knocking on the door to playoff and beat Alabama during the regular season. So I'm not putting Nebraska's D-line in that category yet, but the ceiling is high, I think, for that group. And you put that together with, I still feel like the secondary is athletic and intriguing, and you've got some proven options, but also some younger players coming along. You put those two things together, not to, just skip over the linebackers, but you put those two things together, and, well, we saw in 2009. Like, Nebraska had that D-line and that secondary. No offense really to speak of for long stretches, but it didn't matter. You still got it done when you weren't fumbling or turning it over 9 times in a game.
Brendan, on that defensive side, what is the concern, the question mark with pieces to replace? You feel good about the offensive line. I mean, really the only spots that there are questions are who comes in to fill the shoes, one of the linebacker spots, the inside linebacker spots, I should say, question mark. And then it's really the opposite corner outside Tommy Hill. Those like the two real big question mark spots in the defense. Is there anything else?
Yeah, no, I think those are pretty much the big ones. And of those, corner is probably the larger concern. I think that's just broadly the case. Like if you're good at corner, it can cover up a lot of other stuff. And we'll see who takes that job and what happens there. With the linebackers, like I think there's to talk about, Nebraska against the run last year, really, really good. You're breaking in some new linebackers there. Maybe that hurt you a little bit against the run. I mean, you had guys like Reimer and Henrich who had been, filling run gaps and making a ton of tackles for 2-3 seasons at that point. So you'd expect a little bit of a downturn, at least early on there. So maybe you see that show up in the run game a little bit.
Vogues, tell me what you're doing this weekend and what folks can look forward to seeing with, of course, Counter Reed, what you and Aaron got working.
Yep. Continue to work through some of this spring football stuff. It's a good time of year for that because all sorts of new angles and potential things to research turn up. Nebraska baseball certainly on a run, so we'll probably hit on them on Monday, and just kind of keep an eye on basketball in terms of, I know the season's over, but roster additions aren't over, so see where we go there.
Has Fred reached out to you about the point guard stuff?
He hasn't sought my insight yet, so I've kept my phone charged this whole time, and I know I haven't missed any calls, so he must just be waiting a little bit.
Do you still have film or footage of those Hastings years?
No.
Is the jersey is the Hastings jersey and the Hemingford jersey, are they just off to the left of the football mecca you do this live shot from Do you have your jerseys hanging? Some of us never made a team, so I don't have jerseys.
I have my Hemingford High jerseys because my brother became the head basketball coach there. And
he retired the number?
No, he didn't retire. He hasn't invited me back for a ceremony or anything yet, which is kind of harsh. Wow. But he has access to all of the jersey archives, which, these are jerseys from the 90s. It's not like they were going to use them anymore. He's like, hey, do you want your basketball jersey? I was like, I guess. So I have it. Yeah.
It's not going in the rafters. What? You're going to give it to me?
I mean,
I screwed that up.
I have a white and a red one, Schmitty. If you want to purchase one, we can talk. I'll get you a good price.
Well, my wife has threatened to exile me to our spare room.
My jersey?
No, I'm saying no. No.
I didn't do anything to her.
She wouldn't freak her out that way. But we have that spare room, and she wants me to move the office, i.e. Saturday morning show, away from the kitchen island to in there. And I just said, look, the acoustics suck in there. I can't do it. So both the wife and the child just tiptoe around so they're not within camera shot. If I move in there, if I get some of that foam stuff that we see in radio stations, then I would purchase it. I would purchase your jersey and put it up.
I can see it now.
As a front for me, but just as a tribute to Vogue.
Think about it. The backdrop on the wall, in the frame, Vogel, number 69, right there in the background.
Nice.
I'm kind of team wife on that one. So I tell you what, I'm going to send you a jersey free of charge. That'll help dampen the sound at least a little bit, because I think that's a reasonable request. Kitchen Island's kind of a high traffic area.
It is. Love it. Vogue, you take care, bud. Appreciate you.
Right.
And you have a good weekend. There we go. Walter from Philly says Chris will be relegated to the garage next week. We welcome in the Iron Horse, Mr. Gary Sharp. Sharpie, what's good, man? How are you?
Hey, good morning. Sorry to hear about your marital troubles.
No, it's fine. She just, you know her. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, I know her.
I'm staying out.
Just kidding. She is a lovely woman that has a huge heart, and she's a very good mom.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And she clearly has patience and kindness and understanding. We're going on year 21. It's hilarious. This is just a backstory. No, well, yeah, we'll see. There's still time before 21 hits.
I mean, the next thing you know, she's going to ask you to rearrange so that the show doesn't interfere with the rest of the household. You're going to be buying a new house again.
Dude, I would move out of this thing in 2 seconds, but we have too many dogs. Now, if I could do a tour of the room, there's 4 million rabbits staring at me. Some stuffed, some porcelain, some... It's just she's in full Easter mode here.
I would like to add, anyone who's got the patience to stay with somebody who's in sports talk radio, that's something special. So,
yeah,
no, everyone's disagreed on that. I don't know.
I agree.
I think we're all a real pain in the ass.
Well, here's what I married. Day one of the NCAA tournament, she's in line at a bar to go watch Michigan State. Day one of opening day, Major League Baseball, she gets off work early, and she's watching MLB. She's watching the Yanks. So, we're pretty much in unison there. I was working, of course, but, she doesn't think what we do is work.
True.
And so I'll leave it at that. But with that, one funny story about the bunny, my wife, is – Sharpie pulls up. This was the Zach Brown show 10 years ago.
Okay.
And you're out front of our house, and
right.
you drive us down, and that really was kind of the first time you two really interacted in an extended fashion, but it was just pretty good to see Sharpie in the driveway, lays on the horn a little bit. It frightened her a little bit. And then we crawl in the back, and we all go see a great show down at the rail yard. But it was fun. So there needs to be more Sharpie surprises that way. So, well, I did not get our shout outs.
I love that little just a side story about Schmidt and Sharpie going to the Zach Brown Band show downtown. Was that the one that was like right before COVID?
No, this was
Like
the first time Zach Brown's 2014. So.
Okay, I went to the one in like.
So what Schmidt is not adding about this is we got separated, right? I was with Bruntz.
Yes. Well, and I didn't know if you wanted me to go there or not, but you had a pretty cool night.
Yeah. So backstory is I've known the Zach Brown Band for a long time, and at about 2:30 in the morning in a parking lot and behind Pinnacle Bank Arena, Michael Bruntz and I end up on Zach Brown's tour bus. Yeah, so we're hanging out with Zach Brown.
Schmidt's wife does not.
We're drinking. The guys are just sitting around and they're just playing acoustic. And that's when Zach let it be known that in case the world ever comes to an end and he's attacked by a zombie, he is prepared. He then proceeded to put together a gun in front of us in case anybody attacked him that was a zombie. Now, it was about 2:45 in the morning. At 4:15, we hear this knock on the Zach Brown tour bus door, and it's their tour manager saying, we got to head out. So everybody off the bus. So Bruntz and I walked off the bus. I don't do this story justice. The next time you talk to Michael Bruntz, ask him about this story because it was wild. Absolutely wild.
He went like survivalist dude, didn't he?
Yeah, he goes, Gary, he goes, what happens if, like the world is taken over by zombies? He goes, I'm prepared. I have this survivalist bag. And he pulls out this huge knife. And I'm like, oh, my God. And then he goes back into playing like some songs. Hey, this might be on our next album. I'm like, what is going on?
Meanwhile, here's the machete named Ed. But it was funny. Somehow we went sideways there, but we'll get back to some spring football.
I also had a great time at the Zach Brown Band concert in like 2019, where me and my roommate were walking around downtown Lincoln with a pint of Jim Beam. I don't know how we didn't get arrested for that, but like apparently everyone here has just had a great time at a Zach Brown Band concert, which is
we need Sharpie to make the bat phone call and get him back here.
They usually roll through here probably every 3 or 4 years. They love Lincoln and Omaha. Like they've opened a couple of their tours in Lincoln, so we'll try and get them back here.
That's awesome. That was such a good time. Tim, shout out to you and your grandpa Rick. Vic is in. Vic again reminding us about the weekend editions. Flexible start time. Walter, appreciate you. Warren checks in. Also, we have Patrick that is in. Drunk Monk says, morning, everyone. And we're really late, just keeping with tradition. Tuck is in. Jacko, what's going on? Jacko's take when we started the show off about moving on from Trev. Sharp, we want to go here before we dive a little further into spring football. So it was a good week and got to meet the new AD as well with Dan. But KETV and the Freedom of Information Act, you got to see behind the curtain a bit with the text messages between some regents, the governor, as they reached out to Trev kind of in that 12th hour, some Hail Mary attempts to keep him here. What'd you make of that report?
That we can't quit Trev.
Yeah.
I've tried to be on, Trev quit watch for 10 days and you can't. We got to move on, people. We have to move on. Okay. He didn't want to be here. What Nebraska offered and what Trev wanted were not the same. And Nebraska is going to be better for it. You know what? Sometimes it happens. And it's just unfortunate because of who is involved. So we got to move on. And they got an athletic director who I know we'll get into his press conference that, is a good fit for Nebraska. So you got to move on. I think those being released yesterday, man, nobody's a winner in any of this. And I said that from the jump. Nobody, you can't pick winners and losers. That was embarrassing to everybody involved. That's embarrassing to the state of Nebraska. That's embarrassing to the people that are involved. And it just is a bad look. But it also probably just, reaffirms what we think about what goes on behind the scenes. Now, it's kind of interesting that the governor has taken a very vested interest in athletics. And you heard that again on Tuesday when Dannon was announced. But we got to move on, people. I mean, they got an athletic director. There's momentum in the athletic program, in the athletic department, and now we got to, now we get to focus on spring football. Okay, and that guy is moving things forward, and we like where the direction of that is. But I thought it was just reading through them. It was kind of embarrassing for everybody involved.
That's kind of our synopsis as you react to it. It looked kind of needy. That said, well,
it looked desperate.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes people don't want to be somewhere, and you can't force them to stay in a place that they don't feel like they can execute their vision. And you know what? If that's the case, sorry, we tried. And just say thank you. You left us in a better spot than we were, but we're going to find somebody that's better than you, because that's what you're supposed to do as adults when you're hiring people, is find somebody better. Maybe just Troy Dannon being here for 3 years is a better tenure than Trev. But the one thing I will give credit to Trev, and I know this is probably blasphemy, and I'll get kicked off the show, is if you think about the athletic directors that have come before Troy Dannon, this is probably the best time to come into Nebraska as an athletic director, because there's really no coaching decisions that are on the front burner. Football appears to be in a fairly good spot. There's a stadium project that, you kind of have to sift through and figure out and pick pieces of what we can and can't do and what we want and don't want to do. So I think Troy Dannon walks into a situation that is better than when Peterson walked in, when T.O. walked in, when Eichhorst walked in, when Bill Moose walked in, and when Trev walked in. So it's actually an ideal situation right now. But I hope maybe this is the last, that we can all move on. I mean, stop following him on Twitter. Don't have him as a notification. Wish him well, but focus on the task at hand at Nebraska.
Well, yeah, it's a case of Trev for the first time since maybe T.O., you could maybe even go before, just based on what Eichhorst was brought into, which that isn't necessarily T.O.'s fault, the fact that Eichhorst was brought in to fire Bo Pelini. But, in terms of athletic directors who left the athletic department in a better place than they found it, I think you have to go back to T.O., which is a credit to Trev. But is his reputation spoiled by the way he went out? Maybe. And you get into these texts, he went out in a very Trev way. The Regents were groveling. I'm with you. It's a bad look for both sides there. But at the end of the day, whenever you look back at the Trev Alberts tenure, I think you'll need a couple more years of context to fully understand the Trev Alberts era, both with what happens at A&M, what happens at Nebraska moving forward. But at the end of the day, he left the athletic department in a better place than he found it, and you can't say that about many ADs at Nebraska since the turn of the century.
Yeah, and you know what? His aspirations were something that Nebraska couldn't deliver. And so I hope he's happy somewhere else, but Nebraska is and has to move on. And, Tuesday was a good day. I said this right away because I know a little of the backstory of Troy Dannon from my time in Iowa and him with the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Association. It's a good fit for Nebraska, and that's what I'm going to leave it at right now. But I kind of liked that press conference, guys. I kind of liked his introduction. You know why? Because it wasn't polished. It wasn't super smooth. He had a funky suit on. The collar was odd. He wasn't like a master of the English language. He was just like a normal guy up there.
He's a dude.
Yeah, and he's also a guy that strikes me because as we've gotten to know Rule and what Rule needs. Now, Rule doesn't need a lifeguard. Scott Frost needed a lifeguard. That lifeguard was sitting in the chair and he fell asleep. Okay? Matt Rule has to have the lifeguard looking over the pool because that's required by law. But he doesn't need the lifeguard with a whistle in his mouth. So that's a perfect fit because I also think Troy Dannon probably not in front of the media will be like this smooth talker. He's got that fancy suit on. He's going to be a guy that behind the scenes I think works really well one-on-one or with smaller groups, that he can deliver the message, he can listen, and he can also execute those things. And he strikes me as a guy just by his tone and the way he talks and some of the things he talks about, he'll be good for coaches. Like he gets coaches. And I don't think that's always that easy for an athletic director, but he struck me as that.
Well put on Dan, and I think There's some excitement with at least three of the coaches that have knowledge of him for sure, with Rule and Kraft and that relationship that Dannon had with Kraft, or has had with Kraft, and Fred goes back a ways, and Amy almost got hired. So three of your top coaches here are comfortable. That's important when you talk about retain and develop and recruit. I mean, three big things. Nebraska and Matt Rule, as we switch to spring football, Sharpie, they've done a really nice job of recruiting some talent. We're excited to see what some of these year two guys look like on the defensive side. We're excited to look at the quarterback spot. A third year of Fedoni, a healthy year of Fedoni, completely healthy, which will be really interesting along with the wide receiver room. But I liked what Rule said, and everyone's buzzing about the quarterback spot, so I want to go here with you. Right? Just what
that is so tempting. I mean, would you guys agree? I know it's spring ball. I know it's the first week. I know it's kind of throwing on air. But how far back do you have to go where Nebraska has a guy slinging the football that looks like a quarterback?
Zach Taylor.
Like, doesn't look like an athlete that's playing quarterback, but actually looks like a quarterback.
I would say Tanner Lee. I'm going to go to Tanner Lee. I know Tanner Lee was ruined by what he did in the game, but Tanner Lee was impressive as a practice field quarterback.
Yeah, but and Schmidt, you saying Zach Taylor, and Elijah, you saying Tanner Lee. I mean, that's still about 15 years ago.
It's pro-style quarterback.
Yeah. So that's a luxury where it's one less thing you have to worry about. But back to your point, Schmidt, you saw on Thursday, we're not talking about Corey Campbell, and we should be, because guys look different. I mean, Ty Robinson looks bigger. Guys look cut. Guys look like they've made the next jump with their bodies. But they've done a good job, and who knows if it'll all come together when it gets to nut cutting time at the end of August, is they have more options on the field in terms of talent. Like, I think they could go, at least two deep at nearly every single position. And that's a luxury they didn't have last year if a guy was struggling or a guy got injured. So they've done a good job of managing the roster where they've really constructed it into options. And I'm excited to see some of these guys because they've got a nice blend of some older guys, and they've started to bring in an influx of younger talent that when they walk on the field, at least they meet the eye test. Like, they look the part, they look athletic. And here's the thing. We've said this for a long time. And I'll give you an example of where I'm going with this. It is 2001. 2003. 2003. Frank Solich's last year. We're standing on the field before the game. Nebraska's playing Kansas State. And I'm standing next to an assistant coach. And this is early. The linemen have come out and they're warming up. And we were looking at the K-State offensive lineman. And then we were looking at the Nebraska offensive lineman. And this coach said to me, "What do you notice is different?" And I go, "Those are some grown men down there." And he goes, "Yep, that's the biggest difference." He goes, "Look at their guys compared to our guys. We're in trouble. What has happened to our offensive line?" I look at guys now, and you look at both sides of the ball, and at least they look the part where you go, man, Nebraska looks like a Big Ten team. They don't look like this sleek, skill, fast Big 12 team. They have those guys, but they have Big Ten size. They have a lot more Big Ten bodies than I think they've had in the last couple of years. And that's the first step to being able to compete on the field. And then your X's and O's and your talent level takes over. And then you see where you go from that.
Whenever you talk about Big Ten bodies along the offensive line, what's your reaction to Teddy Prochazka? Apparently his goal to play lighter this season. That doesn't strike you as a Big Ten type thing.
Well, no, not necessarily, but I think for Teddy it's great, Elijah, because there's been a lot of stress on those legs. Okay? I mean, he's got a body that has been up and down throughout his entire career. You go back to high school when he was at Elkhorn South. Remember, he would play football and then he'd go over and play basketball. So he'd have to trim a little bit. So there's been a lot of wear and tear on those knees. And I think that's also a good job of not only Teddy, but people working with him to say, okay, we want you to play at a high level. Something is holding you back, and it's not just injuries. What is it? well, let's work on the body before we work on the between the ears, and let's slim the body down. Let's get you down 15 pounds. Let's see what that does to your lateral movement and then your back and forth movement. And we think that's going to be the cause. And then you can focus on doing your job, which I think Teddy was a little bit rusty last year. And I also think it got in his head because he wasn't very good. And Nebraska needs him to be good. But I think that's also another thing, just to finish this point, Elijah, that I've liked about this staff and kind of learning and seeing what they're doing over 2 years. They don't treat every guy the same. Every guy individually has a plan that helps them achieve success. They don't go to the offensive lineman and say, everybody's got to weigh 330 pounds and they all got to be 6'10". They go, okay, what's best for this guy? What's best for that guy? And let's take care of them individually instead of as a group.
Gary Sharp's with us, the Iron Horse Weekend Edition. It's Hail Varsity and powered by Cornhead Lager. You mentioned plans, right? Let's get into Sat and his plan as coordinator and tight end room coach. And the reason I bring him up is I thought Fedoni was pretty good to hear from this week. And, man, he's a guy this whole state's kind of waiting on to pop. And it's not for lack of intensity. I think things are feeling good for him, and the tight end part's always going to be key and can really screw up an opposing defense. What do you think the plan looks like here? What's Nebraska's plan at tight end in this offense? What would you guess that could become?
Well, can we first start? Can we all agree that they're going to have a quarterback that throws a catchable football?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's something to factor in this season is wide receivers that we were like, wow, whatever happened to him last year? Well, maybe they weren't being thrown a football or thrown open, so it affected how they played. I think guys will have more catchable balls. And I think what you'll see with the tight ends, because I think Nebraska is athletically pretty good at the tight end spot, I think you're going to see a lot of chess matches where you put that tight end in a precarious position where he's one-on-one with a smaller cornerback or a safety or a slow linebacker, where you get them in space in the flat and just a quick little dump out and then let them go one-on-one. They tried that last year with Fedoni early in the year. And then didn't it seem to you guys that not only with Fedoni but all the tight ends kind of disappeared?
I think the execution of it was too hit or miss to keep jacking with. That's why they moved on from it. But, yeah, go ahead and flex out, do the old Gronk flex. Have fun with that.
Yeah.
And why not use it if you feel good about it? But yeah, just mismatch. Going back to your question about tight ends and pro style quarterbacks and catchable footballs. Nebraska wore teams out back in the Zach Taylor, Mike McNeil era. I think you could have a couple of guys. You have different body types to a tight end where Nebraska may want to look at 2 or 3 tight ends on the field at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you're going to need, you're not going to have as much quarterback run game this year. So there's going to be those 6 to 10 plays that need to be distributed elsewhere. And if Fedoni can be consistently a guy every day and Nebraska needs him to, then he's a guy that's a prime target. But that tight end room's in a good spot. They've done a good job of building it up. And we live in a state where we don't necessarily produce tackles anymore. It's bodies that should be tackles that play tight end. So that's going back to this whole thing, because you look at Tony White. Tony White on defense, guys, has plenty of options. At all 3 levels. That's what they're trying to do on offense is build up options, build up that running back room, build up that tight end room. They've got a plethora of wide receivers that they can get the ball to so that they can roll guys over. They don't need to rely on just the top 3. And I think that's what this spring is important for, is developing that depth. But tight end will be one of those positions to develop the depth, but then also use them. If you're going to recruit athletic tight ends and not just straight inline blockers, then use them. And I got to believe that they saw the power of the tight end in the Big Ten last year, and they will find a way to use that more as a safety valve when they need, when it's 3rd down and 6, and people are like, well, okay, they're not going to run the football. What are they going to do? Well, you get it to that tight end out in the flat, and when he catches the ball, he's already 4 yards downfield, and it's on him to get the additional 2 to move the sticks.
Gary, with that tight end room, Carter Nelson, his utilization as a freshman, what do you think of that? Him not being involved in spring football, wants to do track and field for Ainsworth, going to show up this summer. Does that put him behind the eight ball, or is he one of those guys that's so athletically gifted you think he's going to find his way onto the field somehow as a freshman?
Yeah, that's like the huge question. I mean, athletically, he is who he is, and I'm glad. When you're in a small town, it's a big deal to compete in all the sports and finish your high school career there, and that's what Ainsworth means to him. So I don't have a problem with it. The only thing is, we got to be careful. I know there was the All-Star game in Hawaii, but that is a big jump from 8-man to 11-man, and guys look different. And he'll come in and he'll be athletically, he'll be in a good spot, but how quickly do they ramp him up where he looks like he belongs on the field? I have expectations for him throughout his career. I really don't have a ton of expectations for him in his first year because I think they need to see him against like-minded competition, where he's now playing 11-man football and the guys are faster and they're stronger, and what that adjustment is like, because I think we're asking a lot for somebody to walk in the door and all of a sudden they're on the field. And I don't expect that. I think the coaching staff would be blown away if that happened. But they'll work him in. But he's he's working at his craft. So it's not like when he shows up in June, he'll be like, whoa, what's going on here?
Sharpie, will hit some more spring football next week. A thought on Husker baseball. Sounds like a double dip today, and Will Bolton Company are just rolling. Got NCAA tournaments and Final Four thoughts. Duke surviving last night. Creighton bounced by a really physical and talented Tennessee team. Rick Barnes is doing something Rick Barnes doesn't typically do, and they went on quite a run here. Good weekend of sports. So where are you paying attention? Are you going to watch some hoops today? You going to check out Husker baseball? What are you doing?
Oh, hoops, yes. But Husker baseball, Elijah being Mr. Baseball guy, the K-State game is a bummer that got postponed midweek. I mean, K-State's ranked. That's a good one to get on the ledger. Are you more impressed, Elijah? And I'm sorry to turn this question back to Elijah, but I'm curious on his thoughts. Are you more impressed by the starting pitching, or every guy out of the bullpen knows their role and they just complement each other and they stack good performance after good performance?
Impressed? The bullpen's not a complete bullpen to me just yet. You have guys that you can turn to. You look at last night, Kyle Perry getting put in the 8th, bases loaded, no outs, to come in and get yourself out of the 8th inning, get yourself to the 9th. That's impressive. There hasn't been a full complement of bullpen guys enough to where I can say it's been more impressive than the starting pitching. There's still some hiccups with both. I think it's good Nebraska's got a Friday night guy with Sears. I think that's where the massive step up has been in starting pitching. The fact that you haven't had really any bullpen starts this season, that's been a good thing. You've developed that. I still think you need one or two more guys in that bullpen to step up and show you they can be consistent. You know what? Whenever the 8th inning comes around, that you don't let the bases get loaded up in that moment with a 2-run lead.
Yeah.
There's still some work that needs to be done in the bullpen. And you kind of laid out the Kansas State game. Like, I'm not as worried about the bullpen whenever you're playing the Northwesterns and the Ohio States of the Big Ten. Whenever it's Maryland, and whenever it's Rutgers, whenever it's Iowa coming in late April, what does the bullpen look against some teams that I think can expect to be playing in a regional come this May? That's where I get a little bit worried. That's where the test really comes. That's where I think a game against Kansas State midweek would have helped, where you're probably going to be turning to some more bullpen arms. What do they look like against a top 25 team? What is that litmus test? I'm not ready to anoint either the starters or the bullpen yet as being, you know what, they're ready to go. They're good for postseason. But what I've seen thus far is I have more confidence that what the starters have put on paper thus far in the season will translate once you get to the better teams of the Big Ten.
Hey, that game Tuesday night against Creighton will be a good matchup. Creighton's playing well.
Can't wait.
Nebraska's playing well. That's one of those midweek games. Who's the starter? Nebraska's better at that spot now with their starters. I like their depth. And I was around Rob Childress when he first started at Nebraska. They look like a staff that is a Rob Childress staff because they throw strikes.
Yep.
They throw strikes, and if you're not throwing strikes, you haven't pitched in a while. And there's some accountability there. Plus, they haven't had that hiccup where they've had to miss a guy because of an injury or something, or dead arm, something like that. So knock on wood. But I like where they're at. It's about stacking up victories right now. I don't know that the Big Ten's going to help you Maryland is another team that's getting a lot of ranking love. But if Nebraska they sweep the doubleheader today and they sweep Northwestern, I mean, they should be 24th or 25th in the country.
Northwestern's not a great squad, but they have some okay wins.
But you don't have any hiccups. We talked about with basketball. They don't have any bad losses. Right now, Nebraska doesn't have any bad losses, but they have a couple that if you start looking at projections for the NCAA tournament, you're like, oh, man, that Oklahoma and Texas Tech game, that's going to sting.
Well, that's the thing. They don't have any bad losses, but do they have any great wins either? No. Like, there's not any games I look at and I go, that's going to impress the NCAA come the end of the season. And that's kind of my question to you with Kansas State. Is that more important once you get to the end of the season to have a single game win like that under your belt should they have won that game? Or are you more concerned about the litmus test, knowing that you're going into Big Ten play and opening it with some teams that you are expected to win the series, if not sweep in Northwestern and Ohio State? What's the bigger loss? The litmus test where you're at following a string of non-conference series to open the season, to get that test against a top 25 team. Now that you've gotten some development under your belt, you have a better idea of what you are than opening weekend, or is it that end of the season discussion?
That's a great question. I would still take the game at Kansas State. Road game, ranked team. Two teams that are probably going to be battling for the same type of seed. And Kansas State is really good. So that's unfortunate. But I think to answer the other part of your question, Elijah, I think to take the next step under Will Bolt is those games against Omaha, North Dakota State, the midweek games. But then on the weekend where you're playing some of the lower level teams in the Big Ten, you don't have a hiccup. Okay? Sign of growth there is everybody says you're supposed to beat them. Do you realize how difficult that is sometimes when people are patting you on the back and going, hey, you're supposed to sweep Northwestern? That isn't necessarily the case. But if you do that, I think that's a step in the sign of growth before you play some of those teams that, are gonna challenge you, and they can run two really good starters out there against you. I think right now another part of why it's important to beat the Northwesterns of this conference is, man, this conference isn't helping you at the top. I thought Iowa would be better. Iowa got, they gave up 16 last night to Minnesota. There's not a lot of help along the way right now, so you got to help yourself.
Gary Sharp with his Iron Horse as he makes his Saturday morning appearance. Weekend edition of Hail Varsity. Sharp will wrap with this. And are you picking Bama Clemson because we missed it? And then Illinois UConn. Give us what's your lock this weekend before we say goodbye?
We also need your reaction to the Creighton loss last night as well.
All right, let's start with two football schools playing for a chance to go to the Final Four. Mm-hmm. Two football schools. So it can be done, right?
Sure.
With the right hire?
Well, we don't know if they're football schools now. With Clemson's trending down since NIL, and Nick Saban's on.
And there's a new coach at Bama.
Mm-hmm. I like UConn today, and I like Alabama. Tomorrow, I like Purdue, and I like the Duke Blue Devils to go.
Same.
Think about Creighton last night. This is the part of, we talked about this last week after Nebraska played Texas A&M. The cruelty of the tournament and also the beauty is it can, one poor shooting game out of a star, and the other team, it plays a full 40 minutes, and the next thing you know, you're going home. And Tennessee was not the most ideal team for Creighton to play because Tennessee has guards, and there's a couple of teams in the Big East that have guards that are very aggressive and they get after you, and they're great on-ball defenders. And that really stunted Creighton's mode to get into their offense earlier last night. And let's be honest, Tennessee's 18-0 run, now it's a game of runs because Creighton responded with a 20-7 run, but the damage was already done. And throughout the night, just being physical on Ashworth and Trey Alexander just set them off, where Trey never got going, and that's a bummer for him. His final game as a J, he shoots like that. But I don't know. I'm going to talk about this Monday on my show, because we got, a Creighton fan base that listens, is did a Creighton exceed expectations, meet expectations, not meet expectations? Because they went 2-2 in their last four, and I don't know that there were lengthy stretches of the last four games, which includes the loss in the Big East tournament to Providence in the quarterfinals, that you went, man, that's the Creighton team I saw against UConn. That's the disappointing thing, if you're a Creighton fan. But it's the beauty and the cruelty of the tournament is one simple off-night shooting or one injury like we saw last night, and you're going home and you're like, how did that happen?
You want to be playing your best and going down guns a-blazing versus just getting dominated or being off your game, and that's what has got to sit with you as a fan base and for sure a player.
I think in my eyes, and I am no Creighton expert by any means, but I just look at the expectations coming into the season. I think you fell short of expectations coming into the season, given what happened in the tournament last year, and I think you made some upgrades during the offseason. But given where you entered the tournament and what your road to the Final Four would have been, I think you met expectations. It's a very, very good Tennessee team that you lost against, and in order to get to a potential Final Four, you'd have had to go through Purdue as well. Like, given the road they had to make it through in the NCAA tournament, I think they met expectations given where I was at on Selection Sunday. But given where I was at in October, I think they fell short.
Let's also look at Creighton's path a year ago. Their path a year ago was good on them. They got to an Elite Eight, but they didn't. They got some of the upset winners. They got lower seeds.
So last year, the only seed above them they beat was 3 Baylor in the second round because they were a 6 seed. So
they got Princeton, didn't they?
They beat 11, they beat 15, and they lost to a 5. This year, they beat a 14, they beat an 11, and they lost to a 3 or a 2. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Tennessee's a machine. I mean, they're really, really good.
And I think the disappointment lies, and this is, I believe, a tweet from Jacob Badilla last night, that if you combine the 2 scoring droughts for Creighton, they spent 14 and change of that game without scoring a point. If you combine the 2 scoring droughts, like they put up all their points in about 26 minutes. Which
they needed
to win.
They needed Kalkbrenner to be more assertive.
Yep.
But tip of the cap to Tennessee, man. Tennessee guards you, and they guarded you hard. And I think we were all a little suspect on Rick Barnes in the NCAA tournament. Well, kudos to him. That's a good team he's got. I mean, it's not just Dalton Connect, which was nice to see 2 white guys going at each other to see who was the best fly guy. Last night, him and Shireman just making shots. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting offseason in Omaha. It'll be an interesting offseason from Nebraska. I'm sure they will cross paths on the portal world to see who gets who.
I think they already have.
No.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes, they have. You make an offer to one guy from Bellevue West, and he then goes to Lincoln a couple of days later, and he gets another offer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And now he's hanging out with his best friend in Madison and Chucky Hepburn, who is what has to be one of the most loyal guys to Greg Gard that's ever been loyal. Chucky Hepburn might be more loyal to Greg Gard than his wife. Not Chucky's wife, Greg Gard's wife.
Right. Yes. Silent auction here.
Because everybody is leaving Madison, and we're all waiting to do what Chucky wants to do. And the next thing you know, Frankie Fiddler is up there on an unofficial because he's going up to hang out with his friend.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was an interesting development that raised my eyebrows a little bit.
Where do you predict William Kyle ends up? He's got to visit Nebraska Monday.
I would have. You know what? Initially, I said Iowa State. He fits the role of an Iowa State guy, and they have a position open with Trey King. They filled the other position of a big man they needed with a transfer from Charlotte. We'll see. We'll see about Nebraska. He'd be a good addition, but he can't be your 5.
Right.
If that makes sense. And maybe Nebraska. Maybe the only people that want a 5 to play for Fred are us. And Fred goes, I've never really had a 5. We're going to make it work where Mast isn't the 5. But no, William Kyle III has got a pro career. I mean, he's going to need some refinement, and he's going to need to play every day against guys that are his size and can jump like him. But that would be a good pickup. I mean, Nebraska needs a lot of them. I mean, they got some open holes on the roster, but C.J. Wilcher leaving kind of is the role that Frankie Fiddler would play.
Yes.
So some of the dominoes kind of fall into place of, okay, we have this guy. Oh, he's gone. Who's the next guy that fits that role? But as you've seen, Nebraska is super aggressive out on the portal. I mean, it seems like every guy that goes into the portal that is a high major guy, Nebraska is one of the first to contact him.
Sharpie, have yourself a weekend, brother. We'll get caught up again. Thanks for the time as always, man.
Hey, happy Easter, guys.
You too. There he goes. Gary Sharp, the Iron Horse, with us. That'll wind down the weekend edition. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, where you can subscribe. Hail Varsity YouTube, like and subscribe, and find us on Twitter at HVarsity Radio, at Herbal Essence, at Schmidt_radio. And we'll run down Mark Kranek next week. Take care. Happy Easter, and talk to you on Monday with Hail Varsity.